This first stage that I want to talk to you about is really, how do you identify if you're ready to go from paper to digital, or if your current platform, maybe it's a hybrid of digital, maybe you have some PDFs, fillable PDFs, you're using SharePoint or Dropbox or whatever it may be to file those things. How do you know when it's time to upgrade? How do you know when the status quo is becoming overwhelming? I know at the company that I was running before, when we were implementing safety and the processes that we had in place, it felt normal. And it was until I experienced a life-altering incident where somebody almost died. Luckily, they did not. And it was a wake-up call. It was a wake-up call for me and my company that what we were doing wasn't okay anymore. It was treading water 4 feet underwater. We were drowning. And it took that incident for us to wake up and realize it. And I hope as we go through these stages, it doesn't take that type of an incident for you to realize that there is an easier way, there is a better way. That first stage that I experienced, and again, there's many stages, but I hope some of these will help you identify for yourself, is our company had issues with, I call it the single source of truth, but really what it was is that communication breakdown, that ability to make sure that what you're pushing out and the information you're feeding out to your team stays true. And what we had 100 to 150 workers. So as you can imagine, that's about 8 to 10 high-rise projects ongoing at any given time. And the simple task of, yes, we had to create our safety program and keep that up to date, which as you know can be very overwhelming. But just the simple task of changing a form, an update that has to happen maybe from an incident that occurred and you need to update or change something, or just general housekeeping of your safety program, created fragmented worlds. And what I mean by that is we would change a form, get it out to the field by literally driving it to every single site. And 6 or 7 months later, when we'd go and do our site visits, we'd find that the crews were using forms from a year ago or 4 months before that. There was 4 or 5 different versions of the same form floating around across all our crews, across all our job sites. And what that started to create is this, when I say a fragmented reality, it was like an alternate reality of what our safety program was, and the message was getting broken up. There was no ability to keep that from one source pushing it out to all. And so that can be a trigger for you to say, hey, am I struggling with this? Is that something that I need to change? From that, I also found, because of this world, this ecosystem that we had in place, there's so many moving parts that we had to manage. And yes, part of that is, how do I get the message out? And it can be fragmented, but also managing certificates, asset management. It felt like over the years, there's more and more regulations and requirements on our business. And I mean, before the 7-year mark, 7 years ago, when we started implementing what I call safety for the first time, we had safety, but it was personal protective equipment. Wear your hard hat, steel toe boots, and there was some training involved, but that was really it. And then it seemed like every single year and then every single month, we had more and more things that we were required to track. Certificates, as I said, assets and everything else. And I remember I'd go to bed at night fearing. I was scared. I was scared that our business was liable. I was scared that I was liable, because did we have workers working on the edge of the building without certificates? Well, that was actually fairly well covered, but had it expired? I mean, we were tracking this in Excel, and it required us to check Excel to actually know if they expired. Or had our assets preventative maintenance schedule elapsed? Did we miss something? And when you add all those things together, it's just overwhelming. Did my crews fill out their forms? Did they submit it properly? There is no real way to understand if everything was being tracked, because it was so fragmented and so legacy and archaic the way that we were tracking everything. I mean, our crews would do a form in the field and complete it, submit it to the general contractor or prime contractor they were working with. And by the time we got that back to the office, it was 3 weeks to a month later by the time we could actually review it and understand if we were protected properly. Not just protected as a business, but was our crews in the field actually filling out those forms properly? Were they exposing themselves to more danger than they needed to be because perspective they had on the task could have been changed if we knew about it sooner and understood that they were actually at higher risk? And so that weighed on me. And that incident that I spoke about earlier actually poked holes in our safety program and exposed huge liability to the business because some of the forms weren't done properly and so on and so forth. Look at yourself internally and understand, does it have to be this way? Is this really the way safety should be handled? Does it have to be this overwhelming? And one of the last stages here is bridging the gap between the office and the field, the disconnect that happens. And I know this isn't just for construction, but I see this a lot in the construction industry where that gap is it's not getting closer together. I feel like it's getting further apart. And one of the things that I find, it's a natural occurrence. I mean, when I started as a laborer, worked my way up into management, it felt like it was almost overnight. Within a month, 2 months, I started to already forget what it was like to work in the field. I started to get more connected to the office and where you come up with strategies and safety programs and everything else, and you forget about the environment that the field level worker works in. Is it minus 20 out when they're working? I mean, one of the common occurrences for our crews is they couldn't fill out the form sometime because their pen was actually frozen. Or they're so wet when they're trying to fill out the form that their forms are getting soaked, or they lost the form, or their forms and safety program is in their job box that's 4 floors away or across the site or in their truck, and it's not accessible. And so what happens is the field level workers, the men and women of the trades that are there to do a specific job, they didn't join to do safety. They didn't become a carpenter or a drywaller or a plumber to do safety. Yes, that is part of the culture, and ideally it becomes more of that package, but we forget they're there to do a task. And when we just keep pushing more and more on them and it becomes more and more laborious on their shoulders and it takes away from their day-to-day task with all this paperwork and all they do is get more and more trouble, it feels like, we're not bringing them closer. And one of the things, if you always feel like the more safety you're putting in, the further you're pushing your team away and the more and more that disconnect happens, that could be a big sign. I mean, one of the things that is very possible out there when you find the right platform is pulling that together. Software can start to do that. It can start bringing them back into the loop, making safety easy again, and start allowing them to get back to what they signed up to start doing in the first place. And I think that's very important.